Late at night, my 9-year-old grandson crawled out of the dusty air vent. He was shaking with terror. He leaned close to my ear and whispered his first words in 3 years. "Grandpa, they are lying to you. When Dad leaves tonight, do not touch the snow in the yard." I was confused, but I decided to listen. I did not shovel the driveway, and when I stepped out onto the porch the next morning, I nearly collapsed at what I saw. My name is Bernie Henderson. I am 72 years old. Today, I'm going to tell you how my own son tried to bury me alive, and how the silence of a little boy saved my life. If you are a parent or a grandparent who has given everything to your children only to feel invisible in your own home, please stay with me. It is not easy for an old man to talk about family shame. Please give this video a like right now. It helps share my story so other folks from our generation do not fall into the same trap. Thank you for listening. 72 is an age where a man should be sitting by a warm fire, drinking black coffee and watching the sunrise. You should be surrounded by the things you built, the memories you made, and the people who love you. That is what my wife Martha and I dreamed about 40 years ago when I built this house with my own 2 hands. We live on the outskirts of Duluth, Minnesota. It is a beautiful place in the summer, right near the Great Lake Superior. But the winters here are brutal. The wind cuts right through your clothes, and the snow can bury your front door in a single night. Martha passed away 7 years ago. When she died, the warmth seemed to leave this house. I was lonely, lost in a big, empty home full of ghosts and memories. So when my son Hunter asked if he and his wife Megan could move in to save some money, I said yes without a second thought. I loved my son. I wanted to help him get back on his feet after his business failed. I thought we would be a family again. I thought my golden years would be filled with the sound of my grandson laughing in the halls. I was a fool. The shift happened slowly, the way water wears down a stone. First, Megan complained that my old furniture smelled like mothballs, so my favorite armchair went out to the curb. Then Hunter said they needed the master bedroom because it had the big closet Megan wanted. I packed up Martha's old dresses and moved down the hall. But it did not stop there. A year ago, Megan said she needed a home office. They needed the guest room. The only place left for me was the basement. I am a man raised on the idea of being polite. Up here, we call it Minnesota nice. You do not complain. You do not make a scene. You swallow your pride to keep the peace. So, I carried my bed down the narrow wooden stairs into the dark, damp basement. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I was helping my family. But every night, as I lay in the dark listening to their heavy footsteps right above my head, I felt like a prisoner in the home I built. The basement smells like wet concrete and old dust. The small furnace hums in the corner, but the heat never really reaches my side of the room. I sleep under 3 thick woolen blankets just to keep my old bones from aching. The worst part is not the cold. It is the feeling of being erased. Hunter and Megan live their lives upstairs as if I do not exist. They order expensive takeout food and leave the greasy boxes on the kitchen counter. They buy new gadgets and clothes every week, even though Hunter is drowning in debt from his online gambling and fake internet money. They never invite me to sit with them. When I go upstairs to get a glass of water, Megan rolls her eyes and sighs loudly. She treats me like a burden, a stray dog that eats too much food and takes up too much space. The only light in my life is Leo, my sweet, silent grandson. At 9 years old, he carries the weight of the world on his small shoulders. He absorbs all the anger and coldness from his parents. Since he stopped speaking, Megan treats him like a broken toy. But Leo and I have our own language. We share secret smiles. I sneak him butter cookies from the tin under my bed. Sometimes, when his parents are fighting upstairs, he creeps down the stairs and sits with me. We do not need words. I just wrap my arm around him, and we sit in the quiet dark, keeping each other safe from the storm above. But tonight, the storm was not just inside the house. It was the end of December, and the sky had turned a bruising purple. The weather report warned of a historic blizzard. The wind outside sounded like a freight train rushing past the windows. Ice pelted the glass. The temperature dropped to 30 degrees below zero. It was the kind of cold that kills you if you stay out in it for too long. I was sitting on my cot reading an old book by the light of a single bare bulb. That was when I heard the rattling in the metal air vent near the ceiling. It was the vent that connected the basement to the living room upstairs. Leo used to hide in those vents when the shouting got too loud. A moment later, the metal grate pushed open and a pair of small, dirty hands reached out. Leo dropped down onto my bed. He was not just scared. He was terrified. His little chest heaved up and down. That is when he whispered those words to me. The first words I had heard from him in 3 years. "Grandpa, they are lying to you. When Dad leaves tonight, do not touch the snow in the yard." Before I could ask him what he meant, we heard Hunter's heavy boots stomping across the floorboards upstairs. Hunter was shouting my name. Leo put a finger to his lips, his eyes begging me to listen. Then he scrambled back up the wall, slid into the dark vent, and pulled the grate shut just as the basement door flew open. Hunter stood at the top of the stairs. His face was red, his eyes cold and hard. He was wearing his heavy winter coat and holding his car keys. He looked down at me like I was a piece of trash. "Get up, old man," Hunter barked, his voice echoing in the cold stairwell. "I have to leave for the night. Business trip. The driveway is completely buried. You need to get out there and shovel every inch of it right now. I have someone very important coming by first thing in the morning, and the path needs to be perfectly clear. Do it now, and do not make excuses." He slammed the door shut, plunging the stairs into darkness. I sat there on my cot, staring at the closed door. The wind howled outside. Shoveling a massive driveway in the middle of the night in 30 below zero weather was a death sentence for a man my age. But it was not the cold that made me freeze. It was Leo's warning. Do not touch the snow. Why would Hunter force me out into a deadly storm tonight? Who was coming in the morning? And what secret was hidden in the white blanket of snow outside my house? I looked at my heavy boots sitting by the door. I looked at the snow shovel leaning against the wall. For the first time in 7 years, I felt a spark of anger light up in my chest. I decided I was not going out into that freezing dark. No matter what happened, the snow was going to stay exactly where it was. To understand why Hunter was so desperate to get me out of the house into a deadly blizzard, you have to understand the nightmare that my home had become. Let me take you back to just a few hours before that moment in the basement. It was 6 o'clock in the evening, dinner time. In a normal family, dinner is a sacred time. It is a time to sit down, share warm food, and talk about your day. But upstairs, in the kitchen I built with my own 2 hands, dinner had become a daily torture. The kitchen used to be the heart of our home. Martha loved to bake. The air used to smell like cinnamon, rising bread, and sweet apple pie. Now the warm yellow lights we used to have were gone. Megan replaced them with harsh, bright white LED bulbs. The light was so sharp it made everything look pale and sick. The room smelled of greasy fast food, old fry oil, and cheap artificial room spray. I walked up the basement stairs holding the wooden handrail. My knees ached with every step. When I entered the kitchen, nobody looked up to greet me. I quietly sat down at the far end of the long dining table. I remember the day I made this table. I cut down a strong oak tree in the backyard, sanded the wood until it was smooth as glass, and varnished it so it would last for generations. Now, my son and his wife treated it like a cheap counter. Dinner was bagged fast food, cold French fries and heavy burgers wrapped in shiny paper. Hunter said it saved time. But the truth was, Megan just hated to cook, and Hunter was too lazy to help. The silence in the room was heavier than the winter air outside. The only sounds were the loud chewing of food and the cold, sharp clinking of forks hitting the plates. Hunter sat at the head of the table. He did not look at his wife. He did not look at his son. And he certainly did not look at his old father. His face was glued to the glowing screen of his smartphone, the light reflected in his cold eyes. I could see the red and green lines of graphs moving up and down on the screen. He was looking at crypto charts. Hunter used to be a good boy. He was a smart kid with a bright future. But as he got older, he wanted everything fast. Fast money, fast cars, the illusion of success. He lost his first business chasing these wild investments. Now he was doing it again, gambling away what little they had left on digital coins that did not even exist. Megan sat across from him. She was tapping her fake, shiny fingernails on my beautiful oak table. Tick, tick, tick. The sound was like a time bomb counting down. She pushed her food around on her plate with an annoyed look on her face. Then, she started to speak. She did not look at me. She spoke to the air, making sure her voice was loud enough for me to hear. "The grocery bill is getting completely out of hand, Hunter," Megan snapped. "And the heating bill. It costs an absolute fortune to keep that basement warm. We are basically burning cash down there. We cannot afford this extra weight anymore." It felt like a physical slap to the face. The extra weight. That is what I was to them, just extra weight. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that I buy my own groceries with my tiny Social Security check. I wanted to tell her that the basement is so cold I have to wear a wool hat to sleep. I looked around the room, feeling a lump of deep sadness block my throat. I spent 30 years paying the mortgage on this house. I worked double shifts in the freezing cold at the lumberyard so Hunter could have warm winter coats and new boots. I built this shelter for them. And now, I sat here like a beggar, listening to my own daughter-in-law count the pennies it cost to keep me alive. "Did you hear me, Hunter?" Megan raised her voice, glaring at her husband. "Your father left his muddy boots by the front door again. The mud tracks up the hallway. I am tired of cleaning up after everybody. Something has to change." Hunter did not even blink. "I am busy, Megan. The market is moving. Just drop it," he muttered, swiping his finger across his phone. He did not defend me. He did not even acknowledge I was sitting 3 feet away from him. I stared down at my cold burger. The food turned to ash in my mouth. I felt completely invisible. I felt the deep, burning shame of being an old man who has outlived his welcome. I just wanted to disappear. I wanted to get up, walk back down into my dark basement, and hide away from the cruel world above. But then, a small miracle happened. I felt something soft brush against my leg under the table. I looked down. It was Leo. My 9-year-old grandson was sitting in the chair next to me. His food was untouched. His head was down, his shoulders hunched up near his ears, trying to make himself as small as possible to avoid the anger of his parents. But under the table, away from the cold eyes of his mother and the glowing screen of his father, Leo was reaching out. He slowly stretched his small, trembling arm across the empty space between our chairs. He found my rough, wrinkled old hand resting on my knee. Leo wrapped his tiny fingers around my thumb. His skin was so warm against my cold, old hands. He did not say a word. He could not. But he gave my hand a tight, strong squeeze. I looked at his face. He turned his head just an inch and looked up at me with his big, sad brown eyes. In that one look, he said everything. He said, "I am here, Grandpa. I see you. I love you. Do not be sad." A single tear rolled down my wrinkled cheek, and I quickly wiped it away before Megan could see. In that freezing, hostile room, the touch of that little boy was the only real warmth I had left in the world. He was the anchor keeping my ship from sinking. He was the reason I stayed in this house of misery. I endured the cold. I endured the insults. I endured the shame of the basement. I did it all to be near him, to protect him as best as I could from the storm of his parents. I squeezed his little hand back, sending my own silent promise to him. As long as I had breath in my body, I would not leave this boy behind. I did not know it then, but just a few hours later, that same brave little boy would crawl through the dirt and the dark of the air vents to save my life. He would be the one to warn me about the trap Hunter was setting in the snow. By 8 o'clock that night, the Minnesota winter had turned from a cold night into an absolute monster. I was standing in the living room, looking out the frost-covered window. You could not even see the streetlights anymore. The wind was screaming, slamming against the side of the house like a giant fist. The wooden frames of the windows rattled violently. The temperature had dropped so fast that I could see my own breath inside the house. My 72-year-old knees were throbbing with arthritis, a deep, sharp pain that always came with the bad weather. I pulled my old, worn-out sweater tighter around my chest, just trying to hold on to some body heat. Out there, in that white-out blizzard, it was a deadly 35 degrees below zero. It is the kind of cold that freezes the moisture in your eyes. It is the kind of weather where they tell people on the news to stay inside or risk dying of hypothermia in minutes. Suddenly, heavy footsteps came rushing down the stairs. It was Hunter. He was wearing a brand new, expensive North Face winter coat, the kind that costs more than my monthly food budget. He had thick leather gloves on and a heavy travel bag over his shoulder. He did not look like the little boy I used to hold in my arms. He looked like a stranger, a cold, angry stranger. In his right hand, he was dragging my heavy metal snow shovel from the garage. Hunter walked right up to me. He did not say hello. He did not ask how my knees were feeling. He just lifted the heavy iron shovel and threw it down at my feet. Clang! The sharp sound of the metal hitting my beautiful wooden floor made me jump. My heart raced in my chest. "I am leaving," Hunter announced, his voice flat and full of authority. "I have a sudden business trip, a big opportunity. I will not be back until tomorrow night." I looked at the shovel on the floor, then out the window at the raging blizzard. The driveway was already buried under 2 feet of snow, and it was piling up higher by the second. "Hunter," I said softly, keeping my voice calm the way a good Minnesota father does. "Look outside, son. It is a historic blizzard. The roads are closed. You cannot drive in this. It is too dangerous." Hunter rolled his eyes and zipped up his expensive jacket. "I drive a 4-wheel drive truck, old man. I will be fine. But that is not your problem. Your problem is that driveway." He pointed a thick gloved finger at the window. "I need that driveway completely cleared by morning, not a single flake of snow left on the pavement." I stared at him in disbelief. I thought he was making a bad joke. "Hunter, it is the middle of the night. The wind chill is deadly. I am 72 years old. If I go out there and shovel that much heavy snow in this storm, my heart could give out. I could freeze." Hunter stepped closer to me. He used his height to tower over me, casting a shadow over my face. He looked down at me with a gaze so cold, it was worse than the storm outside. There was no love in his eyes, only irritation. "Do you think I care about the weather?" Hunter snapped, his voice dripping with venom. I have a very important person coming to the house first thing tomorrow morning. A VIP. If that driveway is not perfectly clear, his car will get stuck, and you will ruin the biggest deal of my life." He leaned in closer, his breath smelling of strong coffee. "You live in this house for free, Dad. You eat our food. You take up our space. It is time you pulled your weight. You have all night. I do not care how long it takes you. Just get it done." My stomach turned sick. He was my own flesh and blood. I had wiped his tears when he was a baby. I had worked 2 jobs so he could go to a good college, and now he was ordering me out into a freezing death trap just to impress some business partner. He was treating me worse than a dog. Even a dog gets to stay inside by the fire on a night like this. Before I could say another word, Megan walked into the room. She was holding a cup of hot tea, looking cozy in her silk robe. She looked at the shovel, then at me, and smiled a cold, nasty smile. "Do not forget to salt the walkway, Bernie," she said lightly, as if she were asking me to take out the trash. "We do not want our guest to slip on the ice tomorrow. Put your back into it." Hunter grabbed his bag, gave me one last warning look, and walked out the door. The front door slammed shut, sending a blast of freezing wind and snow into the living room. I was left standing alone in the cold hallway, staring down at the metal shovel. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from the absolute heartbreak. They did not care if I lived or died tonight. To them, I was just free labor, a machine that had outlived its usefulness. I slowly bent down, my old joints screaming in pain, and picked up the heavy shovel. Tears of shame and anger burned in my eyes. I felt completely trapped. If I did not do it, the abuse would get worse. They would scream at me. They might even kick me out of the house. I put on my old boots and my thin wool coat. I reached for the front doorknob, preparing to walk out into the frozen hell. I was ready to surrender. But that is when I heard the rustling noise coming from the basement stairs. That is when little Leo made his move to save me. My hand was on the cold brass doorknob of the front door. I had my thin wool coat zipped all the way up to my chin. Outside, the blizzard was screaming like a wild animal. I took a deep breath, preparing to step out into the frozen nightmare. I really thought this might be my last night on Earth. My heart was weak, my bones were old, and the snow was endless. But then, I heard the sharp click of a lock from the top of the stairs. It was Megan. She was locking Leo in his bedroom for the night. I heard her sharp, nasty voice through the ceiling. "Go to sleep, Leo. Do not make a sound. Do not come out of this room. Your father and I are stressed enough without you being weird." My poor grandson. He was a prisoner in his own bedroom. They treated his silence like a disease, something to be hidden away. They did not understand that their constant screaming was the reason he stopped talking in the first place. Megan turned off the hallway light and went into her room, slamming the door. The house fell into a heavy, dark silence, except for the howling wind outside. I closed my eyes and turned the doorknob. Clank. A sudden, sharp metal sound stopped me. It did not come from the front door, it came from the floor behind me near the baseboard. I turned around, confused. In the shadows of the living room, the large iron heating vent cover was moving. This house was built in the 1980s, back when they made the air vents wide and deep to push warm air through the thick wooden walls. The heavy iron grate was pushed up from the inside. A small pair of hands, covered in black dust and cobwebs, gripped the edge of the wood floor. It was Leo. He pulled himself out of the vent, gasping for air. His pajamas were ripped, his face and hair were covered in gray soot. He must have crawled all the way from his locked bedroom through the dark, tight, dusty air ducts just to reach me. The amount of fear a little boy must feel to crawl through a dark pipe like a mouse is something no child should ever experience. "Leo?" I whispered, dropping the snow shovel. "Son, what are you doing? You are going to get hurt." Leo did not make a sound, but his eyes were wide with pure terror. He scrambled to his feet and ran over to me. He grabbed the sleeve of my coat with both of his dirty hands. He pulled me away from the front door, shaking his head violently from side to side. "No, no, no." That is what his body language was screaming. He reached into his pajama pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of yellow notebook paper. His hands were trembling so badly he could barely hold it. He shoved the paper into my chest, looking up at me with tears cutting clean tracks through the dirt on his face. I took the paper. My reading glasses were in my pocket, so I put them on, my hands shaking just as much as his. I held the note up to the dim light of the hallway lamp. It was written in the messy handwriting of a 9-year-old boy. But the words on that page made my blood turn to ice. It was colder than any blizzard. The note said, "Grandpa, Dad is lying. I heard them talking. There is no business trip. He is meeting a man. Do not touch the snow tonight. They are setting a trap. They want to sell your house and put you in the home. Please do not go outside." I stopped breathing. The paper slipped from my fingers and floated to the floor. Put me in the home. The nursing home. The place where old people go to be forgotten until they die. It all made sense in a flash of horror. Hunter was not leaving for a real trip. He was getting out of the house so he would not be blamed. He needed me to shovel the driveway in the middle of a blizzard for a VIP guest. But what kind of guest comes to a snowed-in house at the crack of dawn? Only someone who does not want to be seen. Someone who needs to inspect a property quickly and quietly. If I shoveled the snow tonight, I would wipe the driveway clean. Any footprints, any tire tracks left by this secret visitor tomorrow morning would be completely erased by the falling snow. Hunter was using me to clean up his own crime scene. I looked down at Leo. This brave, silent little boy had risked being punished, risked getting stuck in the walls just to warn me. He loved me more than his own parents did. A new feeling rushed through my veins. It was not the weak sadness of an old man anymore. It was the fierce, burning rage of a grandfather. They wanted to steal the home I built for my wife. They wanted to throw me away like garbage. And they were abusing this sweet child. I took off my wool coat and hung it back on the hook. I looked at the front door, then down at Leo. "We are not touching a single flake of that snow," I whispered, pulling my grandson into a tight hug. "Let the trap spring on them." The wind outside sounded like a dying monster. It threw heavy sheets of ice against the front door, rattling the wood in its frame. The house groaned under the pressure of the blizzard. I stood in the dark hallway looking down at the heavy iron snow shovel I had dropped. My heart was beating so fast it hurt my chest. For the last 7 years, my life had been simple. Keep my head down, do what I am told. Do not make Hunter angry. Do not give Megan a reason to yell. I was like an old dog that had learned to shrink itself into the corner. My hands reached for the zipper of my coat out of pure habit. A part of my brain, the part that was conditioned to obey, was screaming at me. "Go outside, Bernie. Just shovel the snow. If you do not do it, Hunter will explode tomorrow. He will kick you out. You will lose the only family you have left. You will lose Leo." That was my biggest fear, being separated from my grandson. I looked down at Leo. He was still holding onto my pant leg with his soot-covered hands. He was looking up at me, his eyes begging me to listen. Then my mind drifted to Martha. I looked at the empty space on the wall where our wedding picture used to hang before Megan took it down. When Martha was dying in her hospital bed, she held my hand tightly. Her last words to me were, "Take care of our boy, Bernie. Hunter is a good man deep down. Just love him." I had tried so hard to keep that promise. I had given up my bedroom, my money, and my dignity. I thought if I just loved Hunter enough, if I was patient enough, he would come back to being the good boy I raised. I thought I could save him from his anger and his greed. But looking at Leo's terrified face, I realized a terrible truth. My blind love for my son was not saving him. It was allowing him to become a monster. And worse, it was hurting my grandson. If Leo's note was right, Hunter was not just a frustrated man trying to survive. He was a predator. He was planning to steal this house, the house Martha and I built, and throw me into a nursing home like an old, broken appliance. I looked at the heavy snow shovel again. The metal blade shined in the dim light. Hunter wanted me to use my own old, tired body to clear the path for the man who was coming to take my life away. He wanted me to dig my own grave in the freezing cold. A new, strange feeling started to bubble up inside my stomach. It was not fear. It was not sadness. It was self-respect. I thought about the man I used to be. I was a builder. I laid the bricks of this house. I fought through tough winters to put food on the table. I was Bernie Henderson, and this was my home. I made a decision. It was a test for my son and a test for myself. If Leo was wrong, and this was just about a business guest, Hunter would be furious tomorrow. He would scream at me. But I had survived his screaming before. I could survive it again. But if Leo was right, if someone really was coming to appraise my house in the dead of night, they would have to walk through the deep, fresh snow to do it. They would leave footprints. Deep, clear footprints that would freeze in the morning cold. By doing nothing, by staying inside, I would catch them in the act. The untouched snow would be my witness. My hands stopped shaking. The fear melted away, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. "Okay, Leo," I whispered, my voice sounding stronger than it had in years. "Okay, buddy. We're going to stay inside." I unzipped my coat and pulled it off. The sound of the zipper opening in the quiet hallway felt like a gunshot. It was my declaration of war. I hung the coat back on the hook. I picked up the heavy snow shovel and put it away in the closet, out of sight. Leo let out a breath he had been holding. He threw his arms around my waist, pressing his dirty face into my sweater. I knelt down and hugged him tight. I did not care about the soot on his clothes. I picked him up. He was too big for me to carry. My back screamed in protest, but I did it anyway. I carried him back to the kitchen and got a warm, damp cloth. I gently wiped the black dust from his face and hands. I gave him a glass of warm milk and a big sugar cookie. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had felt so invisible just hours ago. But now, it felt like hours again. I walked him back to his bedroom. I tucked him into his bed and kissed his forehead. "You saved me tonight, Leo," I whispered. "Now, sleep. Grandpa is going to take care of everything." He smiled, a real, bright smile, and closed his eyes. I walked downstairs, past the living room, and opened the door to the basement. I walked down the wooden stairs into the dark, cold room. I sat on my cot and pulled the woolen blankets up to my chin. Outside, the blizzard roared. The wind beat against the foundation of the house. But for the first time in 7 years, I did not feel small. I did not feel like a burden. I lay in the dark, my eyes wide open, listening to the storm, waiting for the footprints to appear. The trap was set, and I was ready to see what the morning would bring. The old grandfather clock in the upstairs hallway chimed 11 times. I was lying in my cot in the basement, but sleep was miles away. The storm was getting worse. The basement felt less like a bedroom and more like a concrete coffin. I stared up into the pitch-black darkness, listening to the old wooden beams above me groan under the weight of the wind. Down here, the air was stale and heavy. It smelled of wet earth, rusting pipes, and decades of forgotten dust. There was no window at eye level, just a tiny frosted rectangle of glass way up near the ceiling, half buried in the frozen dirt of the yard. I pulled the 3 heavy blankets up to my chin, but I could not stop shivering. The cold was inside my bones, but the real chill came from the fear sitting in my stomach. I was trapped. If the house caught fire, or if the roof collapsed from the snow, nobody would come down here to save me. Hunter and Megan had made sure of that. They put me down in the earth, out of sight and out of mind. Every shadow in the corner of the room seemed to stretch out like long, cruel fingers. The silence in the house was heavy, broken only by the violent, screaming wind outside. I held my breath, listening, waiting. I prayed that Leo was wrong. I prayed that my son was not the monster my grandson warned me about. At 1:45, the sound of the wind changed. A low, deep rumble cut through the howling storm. I sat up in my cot, my heart leaping into my throat. It was the sound of a heavy car engine. It was driving slowly down our deserted street, fighting against the thick snow. No normal person would be driving in this weather. The roads were closed. The city was shut down. The engine stopped. A car door opened and closed with a dull, heavy thud. Then came the footsteps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The sound of heavy boots crushing the frozen snow was so clear it felt like the person was walking right next to my bed. The footsteps were not rushed. They were slow, deliberate, and incredibly confident. Whoever this was, they were not afraid of the storm, and they were not afraid of being caught. I froze, too terrified to even breathe. The footsteps moved closer to the house. They walked right past the front porch. Then they moved around the side of the house, heading straight for my tiny basement window. My eyes locked onto the small rectangle of frosted glass near the ceiling. A faint yellow glow from the street lamp outside lit up the falling snow. Suddenly, a massive, dark shadow blocked out the light. A pair of heavy black boots stopped right on the other side of my window. The stranger was standing directly above my head. Just a few inches of glass and snow separated me from the intruder. I could hear the man shifting his weight. I could hear the fabric of his heavy winter coat rustling. My chest tightened until I felt like I was suffocating. I pressed my hands over my mouth to stop myself from making a sound. I was completely helpless. I was an old man locked in a dark basement, while a faceless stranger stood right over me in the dead of night. But this was no random burglar. A burglar breaks a window and takes the TV. This man did not try to break in. He just stood there, looking. He was studying the foundation of my house. He was measuring the windows. He was doing a job. The absolute cruelty of it hit me like a physical punch to the gut. Hunter had set this up. My own son had unlocked the gate. He invited a stranger to stalk around my home in the middle of the night while I was trapped underground like a rat. Hunter wanted me to shovel the snow so this phantom could do his dirty work without leaving a single trace. The shadow stood there for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, the heavy boots turned around. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The footsteps walked around the rest of the house, calm and purposeful, before finally fading away toward the street. The car engine started again, and the monster drove off into the night. I lay back down on my cot, my entire body shaking with a mix of terror and rage. I was safe for the moment, but the fear did not leave the room. The trap had been sprung, and the monster had left his mark. I closed my eyes and waited for the morning sun, knowing that the real nightmare was just about to begin. The storm finally died just before dawn. At 6 o'clock in the morning, I woke up with my body stiff and my head pounding. The silence in the house was so deep it made my ears ring. The wind was gone. The monster outside had finally gone to sleep. I wrapped my old knitted robe tightly around my shoulders and slowly walked up the wooden stairs into the kitchen. The house was freezing. Hunter had turned the thermostat down before he left. I walked over to the coffee maker, my hands shaking a little from the cold, and brewed a pot of cheap black coffee. The smell of the roasting beans filled the kitchen. It was a familiar, comforting smell. I poured myself a heavy ceramic mug full of the hot liquid, wrapping both of my wrinkled hands around it to soak up the heat. For just a few seconds, standing in my quiet kitchen, I tried to convince myself that last night was just a bad dream. Maybe the sounds I heard were just the wind playing tricks on an old man. I walked into the living room and pulled back the heavy curtain to look out the front window. The morning sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange. The yard was buried under 3 feet of fresh, pure white snow. It looked beautiful, peaceful, and completely untouched. Except it was not untouched. My eyes locked onto the front gate. Then they followed a line of deep, dark holes punched into the perfect white snow. My fingers went numb. The heavy coffee mug slipped from my hands. Crash! The ceramic mug shattered into pieces on the wooden floor. Hot, black coffee splashed over my slippers and soaked into my pajama pants. But I did not feel the burn. I did not move. I could not breathe. I just stood there, staring out the window, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. There were footprints. They were not the footprints of a lost animal. They were the footprints of a large man wearing heavy winter work boots, maybe a size 12 or 13. The boots had pushed deep into the snow, leaving clear, massive tracks. I leaned my forehead against the cold glass of the window, my eyes wide with horror as I followed the path of the tracks. The footprints told a terrifying story. The man did not wander. He did not seem lost. He knew exactly what he was doing. The tracks started at the front gate, which was still closed. That meant someone had unlatched it, walked inside, and closed it behind them so no one would notice. The footprints walked in a straight, confident line directly toward my front porch. Then they turned. Step by step, the heavy boots circled the entire perimeter of my house. I watched the tracks stop at the living room window. I could see where the snow was packed down flat, as if the man had stood there for a long time, looking right into my home. Then the tracks moved to the kitchen window. And then my blood ran completely cold. The tracks led directly to the side of the house, stopping right above the tiny frosted window of the basement. My window. This was not a burglar looking for a quick way in. A burglar would check the locks, maybe break a window. This man touched nothing. He just walked around my house, methodically studying it, measuring it, watching it. He was stalking my home in the dead of night while I slept completely alone and defenseless. A wave of sickness washed over me. I had to grab the windowsill to keep my old legs from collapsing. Leo was right. My sweet, silent grandson was absolutely right. Hunter had lied. There was no business trip. My own son had unlocked the gate for this phantom, and then he had ordered his 72-year-old father to go outside in a deadly blizzard to shovel the driveway. If I had listened to Hunter, I would have dragged the heavy snow shovel across the yard in the dark. I would have cleared the path. I would have scraped away the snow, and I would have wiped away every single one of these giant footprints. The morning snow would have covered my work, and the yard would have looked perfectly smooth. I never would have known that a stranger came to my house in the middle of the night. I never would have known that someone was hunting me. I looked at the shattered coffee mug on the floor. I looked at the giant footprints in the snow. The psychological torture Hunter and Megan put me through was over. This was a crime. It was time to stop being the nice old man. It was time to call the police. I stepped over the broken pieces of my coffee mug and pressed my face closer to the cold window. My breath fogged up the glass, but I wiped it away with my shaking sleeve. I desperately tried to find a normal explanation for the giant footprints in the snow. I tried to tell myself I was just a paranoid old man. Could it be the neighbors? I looked to the house on the left. The Petersons lived there. They were both over 80 years old and used metal walkers to get to the mailbox. The house on the right had been empty for a year. Across the street lived Mrs. Higgins, a tiny, sweet old woman who weighed less than 100 pounds. None of them could make tracks like this. The steps were too wide, the boots were too big, and the weight pushing into the snow was too heavy. This was a large man, and he did not wander into my yard by accident. The footprints were direct. They showed a clear purpose. I looked at the front door. The lock was untouched. I looked at the windows. None of the glass was broken. That is when the true horror of the situation hit me. This man was not a common burglar. If a thief comes to your house in the middle of a blizzard, they are desperate. They want to get in, grab your television or your money, and run away fast. They test the doorknobs. They look for weaknesses. But this man did not try to get inside. He did not touch a single lock. He just walked the perimeter of my house like he owned the place. He went from the front porch to the side windows, all the way to the back deck, and then calmly walked back out the front gate. He was not looking for things to steal. He was looking at the house itself. It was an inspection, an appraisal. He was assessing the value of my property in the dead of night. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. Who assesses a house at midnight in a historic blizzard? Only someone who is trying to hide a massive secret. And then the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. My son, Hunter. I remembered the cruel look in his eyes last night when he threw the heavy snow shovel at my feet. He demanded that I clear the driveway before the morning. He said a very important guest was coming. But no guest was coming in the morning. The guest had already come in the middle of the night. If I had obeyed Hunter like a good, silent father, I would have gone out into the freezing dark. I would have used my shovel to scrape the driveway clean. In doing so, I would have completely erased every single one of these giant footprints. The heavy snow falling for the rest of the night would have covered my work. By 6 o'clock this morning, the yard would have been a smooth, perfect blanket of white snow. I would have woken up, made my coffee, and looked out the window at a beautiful winter morning. I would have had no idea that a monster had stalked my home while I slept. I would have never known that my son had sold me out. I was supposed to be the janitor of my own destruction. Hunter wanted me to destroy the only evidence that could save me. My knees felt weak. I backed away from the window, my heart racing faster than it ever had in my life. The house suddenly felt foreign and unsafe. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. What if the man was still nearby? What if he was sitting in his car down the street watching the house, waiting for me to step outside? I was just an old man, alone in a house with a locked-in grandson. I had no weapon, no strength left to fight a big man. I needed help. I could not handle this betrayal alone. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old cell phone. My fingers were trembling so badly I could barely press the buttons. I needed someone I could trust. I needed the police. I stared at my old cell phone. My fingers were shaking so much from the cold and the fear that I could barely unlock the screen. I knew I could not just call the regular emergency line. What would I say to a random dispatcher? A man walked around my yard but did not steal anything? They would think I was just a crazy, paranoid old man losing his mind. I needed someone who knew me, someone who knew this house. I scrolled through my contact list until I found the name Gareth Purnell. Gareth is a police officer now, a big, strong African-American man in his 50s. But to me, he will always be the skinny little boy who used to play baseball in my backyard with Hunter 30 years ago. He was a good man, the kind of man you could trust with your life. I pressed the green button and held the cold phone to my ear. It rang once, twice. My heart was beating so loud I thought the intruder outside could hear it. I looked at the dark basement window, terrified the giant shadow would come back. Then, the ringing stopped. "Officer Purnell speaking. How can I help you?" His voice was deep, calm, and slightly raspy. It was a voice I had known for decades. For the last 7 years, the only voices I heard in my home were angry shouts from Hunter or cold insults from Megan. Hearing Gareth's warm, respectful voice was like a shock to my system. The wall I had built around my heart completely collapsed. "Gareth? It is Bernie. Bernie Henderson from Chestnut Street," I said. My voice cracked. I tried to be strong, the way a man from my generation is supposed to be, but I could not hold it back anymore. Hot tears started rolling down my wrinkled cheeks. I was crying. I was sobbing into the phone like a lost child. "Mr. Henderson? Bernie? What is wrong? Are you hurt?" Gareth asked. His voice instantly changed from professional to deeply concerned. "Someone was here, Gareth," I cried. "A big man walked all around my house last night in the blizzard. Hunter told me to shovel the snow, but little Leo warned me not to. The footprints are huge. They are trapping me, Gareth. My own son is trying to get rid of me." There was a heavy silence on the line. Then Gareth's voice came back, strong and fiercely protective. "Bernie, listen to me. Lock your doors. Do not go outside. Do not touch those tracks. I am 5 minutes away. I am coming to help you." For the first time in 7 years, I did not feel alone. The cavalry was coming. 5 minutes felt like 5 hours. I sat in the living room, staring at the front door, jumping at every little sound the old house made. Finally, I saw the flashing red and blue lights of a police cruiser reflect off the white snow outside. A massive, heavy-set African-American man stepped out of the car. He was wearing a thick winter police uniform and a warm hat. It was Gareth Purnell. I ran to the front door and threw it open before he could even ring the bell. The freezing morning air rushed into the warm house, but I did not care. "Officer Purnell, Gareth," I said, my voice shaking. "Thank you for coming so fast." Gareth stomped the snow off his heavy black boots on the porch mat. He looked down at me with his warm, dark eyes. He put a big, heavy hand on my thin shoulder. "Take a deep breath, Bernie. You are safe now. I am right here." His experienced eyes immediately looked out at the yard. He saw the tracks right away. His friendly face instantly changed into the hard, serious look of a police officer. "Stay inside where it's warm, Bernie," Gareth said quietly. "Let me take a look." I watched from the doorway as Gareth slowly walked down the porch steps into the freezing cold yard. The morning sun was a little brighter now, reflecting off the snow so sharply it hurt to look. The air was dead quiet. There was no wind, no birds singing, just the heavy silence of a frozen world. Gareth walked right up to the line of giant footprints. He carefully squatted down in the deep snow. He did not touch the prints. He just studied them for a long time. The steam of his breath rose into the cold air. He pulled a small notebook and a tape measure from his jacket pocket. Size 12, maybe 13, Gareth muttered to himself. But the morning was so quiet I could hear every word. Deep tread on the sole. These are heavy-duty work boots, the kind construction workers or soldiers wear. Gareth stood up and slowly followed the tracks with his eyes. He traced the path from the front gate, past the living room windows, all the way to the side of the house where the basement window was. He walked back to the porch, his face grim. "Bernie, do you have any enemies?" Gareth asked, looking me straight in the eye. "Anyone who holds a grudge against you?" "No," I answered quickly. "I am just an old man. I do not bother anyone. I just live here with my son and his family." Gareth nodded slowly. He looked back at the footprints. This was not a random burglar, Bernie. A burglar breaks in fast and leaves fast. A burglar tries to hide his tracks. Look at the distance between these steps. The stride is wide and even. This man walked slowly. He was confident. He was calm. Gareth leaned in closer to me, lowering his voice. This man was not afraid of being caught because he knew he had permission to be here. He knew the house was unlocked for him. He knew exactly what he was doing. A cold chill ran down my spine. The words hit me harder than the freezing wind. Permission. Hunter had given a monster permission to stalk my house while I was sleeping. My own son had opened the gate for a predator. What was he doing, Gareth? Why walk around the house at midnight in a blizzard? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. That is the million-dollar question, Gareth said, his eyes scanning the neighborhood. He was checking the property, scoping it out. We need to know exactly who this man was and what he was driving. Did anyone see him? We both looked at the empty, snow-covered street. The neighbors on the left were too old. The house on the right was empty. But then Gareth's eyes stopped on the small, neat blue house directly across the street. Mrs. Higgins lives over there, right? Gareth asked, pointing a thick finger. Did she not install a home security system last year after someone broke into her garage? My eyes lit up with a spark of hope. Yes, she has a camera right above her front door. It points straight at our street, straight at my front gate. Gareth put his notebook back in his pocket. A determined look crossed his face. Put your coat on, Bernie. We're going to pay Mrs. Higgins a visit. We're going to find out exactly who the midnight monster was. We walked across the snow-covered street to Mrs. Higgins's house. Mrs. Higgins is a sweet lady in her late 60s. She was already awake, wearing a thick floral housecoat and looking out her window at the police car in my driveway. When she saw us coming, she opened the door immediately, her eyes wide with worry. Bernie? Officer Purnell, what on earth is going on? She asked, clutching her robe to her chest. Gareth took off his hat and spoke in his calm, professional voice. Good morning, ma'am. We need to look at your security camera footage from last night. Someone was walking around Bernie's house in the middle of the blizzard. Mrs. Higgins gasped and put a hand over her mouth. Oh my goodness. Come in, quickly. We walked into her warm, cozy living room. It smelled like fresh-baked cinnamon rolls and old perfume. Her grandson had set up the security system for her, so the video box was connected directly to her big flat-screen television. Gareth took the remote control, and Mrs. Higgins and I stood close to the screen, watching as the television turned into a window looking into the past. Gareth rewound the tape to 10 o'clock at night. The screen showed a grainy black and white video of our quiet street. The snow was falling in a thick, heavy curtain. The visibility was terrible. For a long time, nothing happened. The timestamp on the bottom of the screen crawled forward slowly. 10:30, 10:45, 11 o'clock. "Watch closely," Gareth said, pointing a thick finger at the screen. At exactly 11:15, a pair of bright headlights pierced through the darkness and the falling snow. A large, dark sedan drove slowly down the street. It did not skid or slide. It pulled up directly in front of my house and stopped right at the curb. The driver's door opened. A very tall, heavy-set man stepped out into the blizzard. He was wearing a dark, bulky winter coat and a knit cap pulled low over his forehead. Because of the snow and the grainy video, it was impossible to see his face. But he did not look around nervously like a thief. He did not sneak in the shadows. He confidently walked right up to my front gate, unlatched it, and disappeared into my yard. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched this stranger invade my property while I was trapped underground. 10 minutes passed on the video. 10 minutes of this man walking around the house I built, looking into my windows, standing over my basement. Then the man walked back out of the gate. He closed the latch behind him calmly. He walked back to his car. But before he got in, the camera caught a clear view of the side of his vehicle as it passed under the street lamp. "Pause it right there," Gareth commanded. He zoomed in on the side door of the dark sedan. The image was blurry, but there was a large, bright logo painted on the side of the car. It was not a private car. It was a company vehicle. Gareth adjusted the contrast on the screen until the letters became clear. It was the logo of Hearthstone Realty, a local real estate agency. "A real estate agent?" Mrs. Higgins whispered, looking confused. "Why on earth would a real estate agent be at your house at midnight, Bernie? Are you selling the house?" The question hit me like a bucket of freezing water. "No," I whispered, my voice trembling. "No, I am not selling the house. This is my home. It is the only thing I have left in this world." "Well, that was definitely an appraiser," Mrs. Higgins said, shaking her head. "When my daughter bought her house last year, the appraiser from that same company came late in the evening in that exact same car. He said he had to take measurements and check the foundation." An appraiser. The word echoed in my mind. An appraiser does not just show up randomly. Someone has to hire them. Someone has to ask them to come and determine the value of a property. But there was one massive problem. The title of the house, the deed, the legal ownership, it was all in my name. Solely in my name. When Martha died, the house went to me. I never put Hunter's name on the deed. I never gave him power of attorney. Legally, no one could sell this house or even order an appraisal without my written permission. I looked at Gareth. His face was like a stone wall. He had already figured it out. "Bernie," Gareth said softly, turning to face me. "Did you sign any papers for Hunter recently? Did he ask you to sign anything at all?" I shook my head violently. "No, never. I never signed anything. Hunter cannot sell my house. He has no legal right. It is completely in my name." "He does not have a legal right," Gareth said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "But desperate people do desperate things, Bernie. Especially people drowning in debt. Hunter forged your signature. He faked your permission to hire this agency. He sent the appraiser at night so you would be asleep. And he wanted you to clear the snow so the appraiser could walk around easily without leaving a trace." The truth crashed down on me with the force of a train. My son was not just a lazy, ungrateful child. He was a criminal. He was committing massive real estate fraud. He was selling my house right out from under my feet to pay off his gambling debts. Once the sale went through, he would take the cash and disappear, leaving me with absolutely nothing. I would be homeless. I would be put in a county nursing home, and Leo would be dragged away by his abusive parents completely at their mercy. The anger I felt last night was nothing compared to the white-hot fury that burned in my chest now. They tried to steal my past. They tried to steal my future. And they used my grandson's silence as a shield to do it. "We need to stop him, Gareth," I said, my voice cold and hard. "We need to stop him. Today." "Oh, we will," Gareth said, picking up his radio. "Hunter thinks he is smart, but he just left a giant paper trail directly to a federal felony. Let's go set a trap of our own." We left Mrs. Higgins's house and drove straight to the police station. The station was bright, warm, and smelled like stale coffee and floor wax, but I was shaking so badly I could not feel my hands. I sat in a hard wooden chair in Gareth's office while he made phone calls and typed quickly on his computer. 30 minutes later, the printer in the corner spit out a stack of papers. Gareth picked them up. His face was dark with anger. He walked over to me and gently placed a single sheet of paper on the desk. "Look at the bottom line, Bernie," Gareth said quietly. I put on my reading glasses and looked down at the white paper. At the top, in big, bold letters, it said, "General Power of Attorney." It was a legal document giving Hunter Henderson full control over my bank accounts, my medical choices, and my real estate. My eyes moved to the bottom of the page. There, on the dotted line, was my signature. Bernard T. Henderson. A knife twisted in my heart. The handwriting looked like mine, but the B was a little too sharp, and the H was a little too straight. It was a fake. A good fake, but a fake. "I did not sign this," I whispered, touching the ink with my trembling finger. "I never saw this paper in my life." "I know, Bernie," Gareth said, his voice heavy with sadness. "We just got off the phone with Hearthstone Realty. Hunter brought this paper in 3 days ago. He told them you were too sick and old to handle your own business anymore. He used this fake paper to put your house on the market as a rush sale. He wanted to sell it immediately, under the market value, just to get the cash fast." "But why?" I asked, looking up at him with tears burning my eyes. "Why would he destroy our family like this?" Gareth turned his computer screen so I could see it. On the screen were the financial records the police had just pulled for Hunter and Megan. "Crypto, Bernie," Gareth said, pointing at the long list of red numbers. "Hunter lost over $300,000 in the last 6 months buying fake internet money. He owes money to the bank, to credit card companies, and to some very dangerous private lenders. He is completely drowning." Gareth clicked another file. It was an email from the real estate agency. "This is the worst part," Gareth said. "Hunter found an investor from out of state, a man who flips houses. The buyer doesn't even want to see the inside of the home. He just needed an appraiser to check the outside structure and the foundation. The buyer is ready to pay $400,000 in pure cash, and the deal is scheduled to close tomorrow at noon." Tomorrow. My stomach dropped to the floor. Tomorrow at noon, my house would have been gone. Hunter would have taken the cash, packed up his car, and driven away. I would have come home from a walk to find the locks changed. I would have been left standing on the street in the freezing cold with no money, no home, and no family. I looked out the window of the police station. The sun was shining on the deep snow outside. And then, the final, most cruel truth hit me. I remembered the blizzard last night. I remembered Hunter throwing the heavy iron snow shovel at my feet. "I have a very important person coming first thing in the morning," he had said. "Clear the driveway. Do not make excuses." He knew the appraiser was coming at 11 o'clock at night. He knew the appraiser was a big man with heavy boots. He knew the appraiser would leave giant footprints in the fresh snow, walking all around my house, measuring my home for a sale I knew nothing about. Hunter did not just want the driveway clear for the guest's car. He wanted me to be the one to erase the evidence. He wanted his 72-year-old father to go out into a deadly 35-degree below zero blizzard. He wanted me to break my back, freeze my hands, and shovel away the very footprints of the man who was stealing my life. If I had died in the snow of a heart attack, that would have been fine with Hunter too. It would have made the sale even easier. The pain of that realization was too big for tears. It bypassed sadness completely and turned into a pure, white-hot rage. My own son. The boy I taught how to ride a bicycle. The boy I worked 2 jobs for. He had looked me in the eye and sent me out to die just to cover up his crime. I stood up from the wooden chair. My knees did not shake anymore. The Minnesota nice old man died in that police station. "Gareth," I said, looking at the big officer. My voice was as cold as the winter outside. "Tomorrow at noon, Hunter thinks he's going to sign the final papers and take my house. Let's make sure he gets exactly what he deserves instead." The next day at noon, the Minnesota sun was shining brightly off the mountains of white snow. The storm was over, but the air inside my house was thicker and heavier than ever. According to Gareth's plan, I was sitting in my old armchair in the living room. I was wearing my worn-out sweater and slippers. I had to look like the same weak, broken old man who went to bed the night before. But my heart was beating like a war drum. Hidden in the shadows of the kitchen, just behind the doorway, stood Officer Gareth Purnell and 2 other armed police officers. They were completely silent. The trap was set. Now we just had to wait for the mouse to take the cheese. At exactly 12:15, I heard the heavy roar of Hunter's truck pull into the driveway. Car doors slammed. I heard Megan's loud, high-pitched laugh echoing in the cold air. The front door swung open, and Hunter and Megan walked in. They looked like they had just won the lottery. Hunter was wearing his expensive coat, but it was unzipped. He had a smug, arrogant smile on his face. Megan was holding a fancy coffee cup, already typing on her phone. Under his arm, Hunter carried a thick black leather folder. The folder held the final sale contract. The $400,000 in cash was already sitting in a holding account, waiting for the final signature. Hunter kicked the front door shut and walked into the living room. He stopped when he saw me sitting in the chair. His smile did not fade. In fact, it grew wider. It was a cold, cruel smile. The smile of a predator that just caught its prey. "Well, old man," Hunter said, tossing his car keys onto the coffee table. "I hope you're packed. You're moving out today." I looked up at him, making my hands tremble on purpose. "Moving out? Hunter, what do you mean? This is my home." Megan rolled her eyes and took a sip of her coffee. "Not anymore, Bernie. This old dump is finally sold. We are moving to a luxury condo in the city, and you are going to the Twin Pines nursing home. I already called them. They have a bed ready for you." My stomach turned at the pure cruelty in her voice. But I had to push Hunter just a little bit further. I needed him to admit it out loud. "Sold?" I whispered, looking at the black folder. "But how? My name is on the deed, son. I never signed anything." Hunter laughed, a short, dark laugh that chilled the room. He tapped the black folder. "Do not be stupid, Dad. I had power of attorney. I signed for you. The buyer wired the money this morning. The deal is done. You have 1 hour to pack your garbage and get out of my sight. If you don't, I will throw you out in the snow myself." Click. The sound of the kitchen door opening cut through Hunter's arrogant speech like a knife. Hunter froze. Megan stopped typing on her phone. Gareth Purnell stepped out from the shadows of the kitchen. He was not wearing his friendly neighborhood smile. He was wearing his police uniform. his hand resting on his heavy utility belt. Right behind him, 2 more officers stepped out of the hallway, blocking the front door. The color instantly drained from Hunter's face. He turned pale as a ghost. The black leather folder slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a loud slap. "Hello, Hunter," Gareth said. His voice was deep and filled with authority. "That is a very interesting story. Forgery, elder abuse, and wire fraud. That is about 20 years in federal prison." Hunter's mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no words came out. His arrogant mask shattered into a million pieces. He looked at me, his eyes wide with pure shock. I slowly stood up from my armchair. I did not shake. I did not bend my back. I stood up to my full height, looking my son straight in the eye. "Did you think I was just going to lay down and let you bury me in the snow, Hunter?" I said, my voice strong and steady. "I know about the appraiser. I saw the footprints. You forgot one thing, son. I built this house, and I will decide who leaves it." "Arrest them," Gareth commanded. The officers moved in fast. In 2 seconds, they grabbed Hunter's arms and slammed him against the wall. Click, click. The sound of cold steel handcuffs locking around his wrists was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Megan dropped her coffee. It spilled all over the wooden floor. An officer grabbed her wrists and she instantly started screaming. "It wasn't me! It wasn't me!" Megan shrieked, crying real tears of terror. She looked at Hunter with pure hatred. "It was all his idea. He forged the papers. He forced me to go along with it. He lost all our money." Hunter did not fight back. He did not scream. He pressed his forehead against the cold wall, his eyes squeezed shut. He was completely humiliated. The big, tough businessman was now just a handcuffed criminal crying in his father's living room. Justice was finally served. The trap had closed. The monsters were caught. The heavy front door closed behind the police officers as they dragged Hunter out into the freezing snow. I watched through the window as they pushed my son into the back of the police cruiser. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the snow, a silent alarm announcing his shame to the entire neighborhood. Megan was left standing in the living room. Officer Purnell said they did not have enough evidence to arrest her immediately since Hunter's signature was the only one on the fake documents. But her freedom did not matter to me anymore. Megan stopped crying the second the police left. She wiped her mascara-stained face, sniffled, and looked at me with her cold, narrow eyes. She crossed her arms, trying to act tough. "Well," Megan sneered, looking around the living room, "I guess I will just pack Hunter's things. I am staying in the master bedroom until I find a new place. I am not leaving until I am ready." I looked down at the black leather folder lying on the floor. I slowly bent down and picked it up. Inside was the deed to my house, the legal paper that proved this home, this land, and everything on it belonged to me. I looked at the paper, and then I looked at Megan. "No," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a steel blade. Megan blinked, surprised. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I said, taking a step toward her. I did not shrink. I did not look at the floor. I stood tall in the home I built. You do not get to stay in the master bedroom. You do not get to stay for dinner. You do not even get to pack. You have exactly 5 minutes to get your coat, walk out that front door, and never set foot on my property again. If you are not gone in 5 minutes, I am calling Officer Purnell to arrest you for trespassing." Megan's jaw dropped. She looked at me as if she had just seen a ghost. The quiet, invisible old man from the basement was gone. In his place was the rightful owner of the house. You cannot do this to me, Megan shrieked, her face turning red with fury. I am your family! Where am I supposed to go? You stopped being my family the day you counted the pennies it cost to feed me, I said coldly. 4 minutes. Megan saw the absolute certainty in my eyes. She knew I was not bluffing. Cursing under her breath, she grabbed her expensive purse from the counter, threw on her coat, and stormed out the front door, slamming it so hard the windows rattled. The house fell into a deep, beautiful silence. I stood in the middle of the living room, breathing in the quiet air. The smell of Megan's cheap perfume was already fading. Then, I heard a soft creak from the top of the stairs. I looked up. Leo was standing at the top of the staircase wearing his pajamas. He had watched the whole thing. I dropped the black folder on the table and opened my arms. Come here, Leo, I whispered. Leo did not hesitate. He ran down the wooden stairs as fast as his little legs could carry him and leaped into my arms. I caught him, holding him so tight I never wanted to let go. He buried his face in my shoulder, shaking with silent tears. But this time, they were not tears of fear. They were tears of relief. The monsters were gone. It is over, buddy, I whispered into his hair, rocking him back and forth. No more yelling, no more fear. It is just you and me now. The very next day, I went to the courthouse with Officer Purnell. I filed the emergency paperwork to take full legal custody of my grandson. The judge took one look at Hunter's fraud case and Megan's abandonment and stamped the paper without a second thought. Leo was mine to protect forever. When we got back home that afternoon, I did one last thing. I walked down the hallway to the basement door. I looked down the dark stairs into the cold, damp room that had been my prison for a year. I closed the heavy wooden door. It turned the brass key, locking it tight. Then I took a hammer and a long iron nail, and I drove that nail right through the door frame, sealing the basement shut forever. I picked up my bags and carried them upstairs, right into the master bedroom where the sun was shining through the big windows. I was back where I belonged, the king of my own castle. Spring came late to Duluth, as it always does, but when it finally arrived in May, it was the most beautiful spring of my entire life. The heavy, suffocating mountains of snow slowly melted away, turning into rushing water that washed the streets clean. The dark, freezing winter was finally gone. With the melting snow, the heavy weight of fear and sadness was lifted from my shoulders and from my home. The house felt alive again. I opened all the windows to let the fresh, warm breeze blow through the rooms. The harsh, white lead lights Megan had installed in the kitchen were gone. I put back the soft, warm yellow bulbs that Martha used to love. The smell of cheap room spray was replaced by the smell of real baking. Leo and I made cinnamon rolls every Sunday morning. One Saturday afternoon, Leo and I were out in the front yard. The sun was shining on my face, warming my old skin. We were on our knees in the damp, rich earth, working together. We were planting a new rose bush, right in the same spot where Martha's favorite garden used to be. Leo was wearing a pair of bright yellow gardening gloves. He was digging a hole for the roots, his little face serious and focused. He was not covered in soot anymore. He was not hiding in dark air vents. He was just a happy, safe 9-year-old boy playing in the dirt with his grandpa. I reached for the small gardening shovel, but it was just out of my reach. I can't quite get it, I muttered to myself. Then I heard a sound. It was a soft, clear voice. "Here, Grandpa." I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I slowly turned my head and looked at Leo. He was holding the small shovel out to me. He was looking right into my eyes, and he was smiling. A real, beautiful, confident smile. Did Did you just say something, Leo? I whispered, my eyes instantly filling with tears. Leo nodded his head. I said, "Here, Grandpa," he repeated, his voice a little stronger this time. Tears of pure happiness rolled down my cheeks and fell into the fresh soil. The trauma was breaking. The safety of our home, the love, the peace, it was healing him. My grandson had found his voice again because he finally knew that no one in this house was ever going to yell at him again. I pulled off my dirty gloves and pulled him into the biggest, warmest hug of my life. Justice had been served. Hunter's trial was short. The evidence was overwhelming. He was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for fraud and elder abuse. He lost everything. Megan, having nowhere to live and no money to steal, moved away to another state. I do not know where she went, and I do not care. I kept the house. I kept my grandson. I kept my dignity. That evening, after Leo went to sleep, I stood on the front porch with a cup of hot tea. I looked out at the green lawn and the clean paved driveway. I thought about that freezing December night. I thought about the heavy snow shovel Hunter threw at my feet. I thought about how close I came to walking out into the blizzard and clearing the path for the monster who wanted to ruin me. For 7 years, I thought my job was to work hard to please people who did not love me. I thought being a good father meant suffering in silence. I looked up at the stars, and I remembered the whisper that saved my life. Do not touch the snow. It is a simple phrase, but it holds the greatest lesson I have ever learned. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is to stop pleasing those who hurt you. Sometimes you do not need to fight or run or work yourself to the bone. Sometimes doing absolutely nothing, letting the snow lie untouched, is the only way to save yourself.